if you keep too much money in cash, if you hoard cash without any specific purpose behind it, you're going to start paying taxes, especially if you are in that 45% bracket. Then half of that interest will be gone to taxes. You like to sponsor the government.
If you lose 5% of your investment portfolio, maybe it will ruin your afternoon, but it might not even ruin your day. But if you lose 50% of your portfolio, it might ruin your life.
How much longer do you actually have to work to reach your goals because you invested in a low performing asset class versus just taking that cash and investing it properly in a diversified portfolio? I've seen this buying years, sometimes decades for people's lifestyles because...
Cool. So in our previous conversation, we introduced the concept of diversification for investors in South Africa. And you'll remember, Peter, we kind of introduced it on a macro level, just kind of big picture, what the different asset classes were, currencies and all that kind of thing. Just tell us, what are we going to be talking about today?
So when we understand diversification, we often want to see at a totality what the portfolio looks like. But then sometimes people can be very concentrated in one specific kind of sector or company. And what we're going to discuss today is understanding, what percentage do we consider to be over-concentration? Because, we're talking a lot about in general terms here, but is there like a specific rule that we can follow to understand that if the wealth that we have are concentrated this percentage in just this specific area, it could become a risk? So we're going to unpack, firstly understanding what that rule might mean, and then later on, we'll tell you the exact number of what we'd consider to be a concentrated risk exposure to one specific area.
Okay, cool. Thanks. And so when we talk about concentration risk, that's a proper defined term that we use in financial advice. And so concentration risk, an example is if someone has, say, 10 million Rand invested in a unit trust, and it's with one company's fund, and that fund picks stocks, like an active managed fund, and that fund has 20 stocks in it, 20 company shares, for example. Only 20 shares in the whole world, and most of, or maybe all of your investable wealth is now in that one unit trust, in that one investment fund. That would be an example of concentration risk. Another example might be if you are heavily invested in one company's share. So you have a strong feeling towards this company, this tech, this whatever it is, and you have a lot of money in there, and a lot of your personal wealth is in that share. That's kind of where we look at concentration, and we just think to ourselves, I think you would know, Peter, sometimes we've seen and read the stories in the newspaper about scandals about companies and how the value of a share unfortunately can just plummet almost overnight. And so those are the things that, like, for us, send up flares into the sky to say, like, help, we need to mitigate against this. But now, Peter, I want to throw this back to you now, play devil's advocate. You're invested in let me just say, a MSCI All Country World Index. That's one ETF. Surely you're over-concentrated, right?
I love that one. So yes, people might consider, let's take it a step further and say, you've got one ETF or index fund on one platform. Oh no, that's a problem. What if the platform goes down? So it's important to distinguish what we mean when we talk about diversification and concentration risk. So owning one index fund that is diversified and has exposure to, in your example, All Country World Index, 85 to 90% of the world's investable markets, that is not a concentration risk, because what you're doing in that instance is you're just buying into an index, a combination of algorithms that invests automatically in thousands of companies. So there's no chance that the index will collapse, because the index is just a computerized program that invests in different countries. But let's say you now think you've got the skills to go and pick individual stocks, and you go look at the markets, and you believe you are able to do it well, and you want to buy the top 10 stocks in the world, and you kind of go and do research and fundamental analysis and technical analysis and all of that. Now you are very concentrated risk, because even if you own 10 stocks, that is still a massive risk, because if one of them goes down, that's 10% of your portfolio. If two of them goes down, it's 20%. And oftentimes what happens is people follow trends. They hear on the news, Tesla is up this month by 10%, and the top 7 tech companies, I need a piece of that. And so they start following these trends. And what's then happening is you probably buying into companies at a very high inflated price, overvalued price, where you try and put all your eggs in one basket because of the hype. And they also most likely concentrated in one sector, maybe the tech sector. Now, if something happens to the tech sector and all 10 of those shares drop, that's basically your entire portfolio. So we need to kind of map out almost like dissect what we have into the granular level to understand how much exposure do we have to different sectors, economies, everything we covered in the previous episode, to understand that. Yeah. And then know that if we talk about concentration risk, it's at the granular level of a company, a stock. And that is what we're referring to today. Equity as an asset class is broad in the sense that it's very, investing in many companies. Having 100% exposure to equities in your portfolio, probably also going to be concentration risk, I guess, unless you're very young and you don't have any other goals. It's just investing for the long term. Yeah. Equally, having 100% in cash might sound safe because chances of you losing money in the sense of having less money in your bank account is very low. But inflation is going to erode most of your value and your purchasing power will decrease. So that is also a form of concentration risk within a specific asset class. But what we're trying to establish is on a granular level, how much, what percentage maybe, and I'm going to ask you, what is that percentage that we're referring to is a safe amount to have concentrated in one specific area?
Yeah, so this is something that I didn't come up with overnight, but it's over the years I've kind of realized that we, at Freedom, what we employ is the 5% rule. And so by the 5% rule, what we mean is you don't want to be exposed to any one investment by more than 5%. Any one position by more than 5%. Professor Scott Galloway, I really love his stuff. He says, don't hold more than 5% in any one position in your portfolio as you're building up your wealth. And I like his reasoning. He says, if you lose 5% of your investment portfolio, maybe it will ruin your afternoon, but it might not even ruin your day. But if you lose 50% of your portfolio, it might ruin your life. And so if you, for example, and this is what happens to a lot of people who maybe have a startup company, they do well, they start investing in other companies, they get emotionally kind of involved, or how can I say, they buy in emotionally into an initiative. Like, I really love this company, they're doing great things for the environment, etc. Putting 30% of my wealth into this company. Okay, great. It doesn't work out now because most companies fail within the first 5 years. And now 30% of your wealth is removed from the table. Now you have to rebuild. Now your loss compounds over the years. And so what we look with clients' financial portfolios, when we kind of stress test the outcomes for their lives, we reduce the returns on their portfolios to see, at what point in time is the breaking point. And we're like, okay, cool. You can afford to take volatility and that in your life because you've got enough of a diversified portfolio to weather these storms. Not everything is in one sector, or not everything is behind one company. And so 5%, to have 5% in a company share, up to 5%, or in something like a crypto, like a Bitcoin, for example, a crypto asset that is like Bitcoin itself, that is one thing. You can have many of them, and if you do, well done, cash out soon. But if you have many of them, then that's great. But then how much is that in terms of your total portfolio? And like, I don't know about you, Peter, but what I have seen is when people go heavily into an asset class, or not even an asset class, into one thing, it might be driven by a couple of biases maybe. Firstly, the one bias might be familiarity. They just know this thing. They work in this industry. They just really think that, they work in petrochemical and this is where it's at, and they put a lot of money into it. But they're kind of emotionally invested in it, and now they want to be financially invested in it too. And those two things don't always don't always go together well. But then what you also might find is people don't know actually what they need and how much money they need. And so they start taking outsized bets on something because they think they need so much more than maybe what they do need. It's that lack of clarity that sometimes forces a person to say, you know what, I want to put 20% on red and spin the wheel and see what happens. It's that is what I've seen people do to try and get a better outcome because they think they've got to risk it all because they haven't maybe planned properly or they don't know what their future might look like.
And to conceptualize this 5% rule, I like to let's use rugby. We are a rugby nation. We won the World Cup 4 times. For those who don't know, if you have a rugby team of 15 players and you make all of them props, all big strong flace people, they're gonna be very strong in the sense that if you scrum against 8 props, you're probably going to lose. They're going to beat you, but they're going to be slow. And if the ball is out, you give it to a fast guy, and it's gonna run holes into them. Equally, if you put 15 wings on the field, they will be very fast and efficient and agile, but they probably will lose every single scrum and line out because they will never be able to get the ball. So we're not putting everyone in one position and think we're going to win. Rasi sits and he says, all right, we need these people, this combination here works well for this situation. Analyze the opposing team, how do they play and where's their strengths. And that is why we don't want to put our bets on one specific thing, because you can have the best player in the world in one position. And, I always think back, Rugby 08 is a PlayStation game that I played, and you can pick the team and you can even create your own players. And then sometimes you can duplicate the same player and you think, if I max out all the attributes for this specific player and copy him for 15 people, I'll win. No, you don't, because they're not used to that. So that's kind of how I see it is if we want to build a portfolio, if we want to build a winning team with our money, we need to have different areas that's strong in different situations, and collaboratively we can win. We can win at the game and at life. And that is the 5%. And I like what you said, that losing 5% in your portfolio, it's going to hurt. You're going to feel it. You're going to, be a bit sad for a day or two, but you'll get on with life because the other 95 will carry you. But if 50%, that could be detrimental. And last time we spoke about the psychology around money is if these things happen to us, where it's a massive shock to our financial portfolio, we do other stupid things with our money, unfortunately, in those situations, which is even more destructive. So we're trying to prevent those situations from happening. And we therefore look at our total portfolio to make sure we don't make any mistakes there. One thing that I often see with clients approaching us is they have a lot of employer stock. So maybe they're working for a big tech company, maybe like a Microsoft or one of those guys. And then they've got a lot of their wealth tied into that company employment stocks, which is good in totality, that will increase their net worth. But there might be a chance that company actually goes under. And I've seen this happening in the past where a person owned a lot of stocks in a company and the company went down. And if you kind of see your future playing out when you one day want to retire, maybe even retire early because you're giving everything to this company. And, it's nice, you're earning a salary, you're getting stock options. But then the company goes down, that's going to derail your entire plan. So we also want to be cautious of that happening. We always want to be positive and believe everything will work well, but life happens. And we want to make sure that we pick our players accurately and strategically so that we can win whatever opponent we face in the way that we use the best options that are available to us.
Yeah, that's such a good point, especially with the stock options, because here at Freedom, like what we do is we quantify your position and we try and understand how big this position is, how much of a role it plays in your financial life and your portfolio. And this is not just something that I one day was lying in bed and thought, oh, that'll be cool. It's actually, unfortunately, built on real experiences from real people. When I was at my previous firm years ago, there was, someone known to the firm who retired, and they had a large position in company stocks, company shares in South Africa. And so what happened was they worked for the company for many, many years. And over that time, they went up the corporate ladder, they got promotions, and then they got these bonuses and or stock options, share options. The company culture was, I think at the time, take a lot of the shares because it shows conviction in the brand and all of that. But I think also, if you're an executive at a company, you're senior manager or something, which many of our clients are, a lot of them are very like kind of highly experienced, highly skilled professionals who've worked their way up to these positions where they now have real authority and decision-making power. You really do feel invested in the company, like literally. You give a lot to the company, and then you get these share options, and you take them, and you kind of hoard these shares. And that's what happened to this one person, this one client, and they were warned. Like we spoke about the exposure to this share, and it's like, no, I know the company, I know the workings, I know what's behind the curtain, great things are going to happen, and all that. Well, COVID happened, and certain sectors were hit very hard, and they haven't necessarily recovered like everybody else has, or many other sectors have. It seems like if you were in technology in the world, in the tech sector, you were okay, but anyone else, it's been like a bear market for like 20 years almost. That's how it feels. And so this company, their share price hasn't necessarily recovered. And so this person retired with a net worth of X amount, and now it's X minus 40%. And so it did literally compromise their retirement. The retirement is no longer what it was going to be. And so, now being a lot more experienced, further down the line, we look at our clients' portfolios, and we will have to kind of play that scenario and we do scenario modeling with our clients, as you know, and we'll just say, what if this was no longer here anymore? What impact will that have on your life? And we don't just do that with the employer share schemes, the stocks. We'll also do that with anything else, like, for example, a crypto holding. If it's a big gold position or something, we will say, what if this is gone, or what if it reduces in value? And then when we plan for the client, I will kind of take that asset away quickly and see what the rest of their life looks like without it. Because you don't want one thing to be the thing that props you up, because it's going to, if someone just kicks it away, it's like a crutch. If you're leaning on a crutch, someone kicks it away, you fall down. But if you're leaning on a crutch, but you've also got the wall and you're also standing on both of your feet, someone kicks the crutch away, you're not going to fall. You might wobble a little bit, but you'll be fine. And we don't want someone to financially fall. We want someone to be robust and resilient. And so it's with the employee share schemes that we have seen this happen. And so what we've done with clients as recently as this year is to look at scenarios where we say, okay, fine. How much of this money do you really need in your life? How much of these shares? The shares today are worth, say, 2 million rand. You've got 5 years to retirement. How much do you need of this in your life? And we remove it, all of it. And then we say, okay, well, that's hurting your financial future. And then we start reintroducing some of those shares back into the picture, until we see, okay, that's a good retirement. And then the rest of it, they don't need that to be invested anymore in those shares. And we will try to take that away out of the shares. Like they can maybe have an option to vest those shares, to liquidate them. Take that and then invest it in something more diversified, like a global ETF or something like that. And then just to try work towards that 5%, if possible, get it down towards that, so that, we don't want anything bad to happen. But unfortunately, I mean, you would know with financial advice, you hope for the best, but you've always got to plan for the worst. And the worst case scenario, 5% down. I don't know about you, but I think a lot of investors don't even know that they've been down 5% many times before, because the markets move very violently sometimes. Look at the Trump tariffs. A lot of people were down more than 5%, and I don't even think they were aware of it at the time. And so that is why that rule is in place with our firm. And it's a lesson learned, in real life experience. I don't know if you've seen any other examples of people being exposed or overexposed to any sort of position before.
One of the quite common things that I see is actually cash. So people might either come from a point where something happened in their family, where they got struck by a financial disaster and that scared them, they got spooked, or maybe it's just a bit of lack of education of knowing what money can do. And then they concentrate most of their wealth in cash instruments. So maybe fixed deposits or money markets, cash in the bank, because that seems like the safe option for us. Because, it's cool. I'm getting an interest. I can see visually every month I'm getting interest payment. I can use that money. I can spend it. A great strategy. But now, if we look at the long-term effect of that specific concentration risk in cash, we've got inflation that's going to erode most of that value. You're probably going to start paying taxes on that again. Unfortunately, we pay taxes when we earn money, when we save money, when we invest money, when we die. And if you keep too much money in cash, if you hoard cash without any specific purpose behind it, you're not saving for a trip overseas or a deposit for a house. You're just keeping it there because you don't know what else to do. You're going to start paying taxes, especially if you are a high earner in that 45% bracket. Then half of that interest will be gone to taxes. You like to sponsor the government, and then your net of tax return is actually much lower than what you thought you had in your bank account. So that's a big thing. And so cash plays an important role in a portfolio. Yes, that's true. But we need to be cautious of not putting everything there because it's safe. It's probably much more unsafe than you think it is. And we therefore need to make sure. And what I like, what you said is stress testing. This is probably the most fun I have with our conversations with clients. Is a lot of times financial planning is done in a linear form, and it's kind of how we get taught. In fact, we analyze documents, we calculate needs, we calculate a shortfall. All right, reverse back to what do we do today to make up for that shortfall, and that is if the sequence of events will happen as we predict they will, which they never do. So the software that we use, the cash flow modeling, is, yes, we can have a kind of standard plan that we say, like, if everything goes according to plan, this is what the picture looks like. But if this happens, what will the effect be? If this happens, and let's say in a sense of maybe someone has a lot of company stocks, but they have the option to vest. Maybe you don't need to keep all of that. Maybe you can vest that and retire early. That's sometimes the fun conversations is, let's maybe rather take that money out and go explore, go on a trip, because you can. Because we've stress tested your portfolio and say, if we take this out, you'll still be okay. And that oftentimes brings that clarity as to understand what we have and what it can mean to us. And that's essentially what we're trying to achieve, is understanding what role can money play in our lives and what meaning can it bring to us to just live an awesome life. And so we use that type of modeling to determine, maybe you, going back to my example, keep everything in cash. How much longer do you actually have to work to reach your goals because you invested in a low performing asset class, versus just taking that cash and investing it properly in a diversified portfolio? I've seen this buying years, sometimes decades, for people's lifestyles, because it's much better invested, it has better exposure. So if you visually see that playing out, it's much easier to then make a call and say, okay, well, maybe it's not the safest option to keep everything here. Let's now invest it and be smarter about it, because then you essentially get to live a better lifestyle. And that fits into that 5%. Maybe if you're starting out and you've got a big emergency fund, you're probably going to be more than 5% in cash. That's also okay. But again, it's per situation, what makes sense for you and where you are at in life, where in totality, looking at your portfolio.
Yeah, that's actually a very good point. We've had a few families appoint us over the last couple of years where they got kind of analysis paralysis. They had all this money just in cash because they didn't know what to do with it. I'm talking about millions. And they said, yeah, well, it's getting 8% a year. Money market at the moment, cash is about 8% a year. So they said, yeah, it gets me 8% a year. But then I say, no, your tax rate, you're at the marginal tax rate now of 45%. So you take 8 minus 45% and you get a lot less. Now it's also interest rate linked. So now the interest rate goes down. So now your 8% becomes 7%. Becomes maybe 6.5% at some point, maybe at the bottom of the interest rate cycle, when it bottoms out. 6.5% less 45%. You're not looking at much anymore. And maybe inflation is higher than that. Then you're making a real loss. And so that is why the safety of cash, it's great to be there if you're ready to go somewhere, like to do something with the money. But it's not I don't think it's the end point. It's not the destination. It's just somewhere where you might start off from and deploy capital. So once again, overconcentration in cash It's an overconcentration in donating money to the government because the tax is going to be high, and it's an overconcentration on interest rates. You rely on them. It's an overconcentration in rands probably as well, because it's probably local cash. Offshore cash is rubbish. So you can only really invest in local cash. So yeah, that is why, if you kind of sum it up, the 5% rule for us is quite important. Don't expose yourself to one single position over 5%. 5% or lower, if anything happens to that position, it shouldn't really impact on your life. It might just potentially peeve you off for the day, but you'll forget about it and you'll come back, and then you see the next day the market's bounced and your 5% was made up by the rest of your portfolio. And that's what we try to hope and achieve with the 5% rule. In our next chat, what we're going to do is dig a little bit deeper into that now and give people an insight into what we actually do and how we analyze clients' financial portfolios to track their allocations and exposures to different sectors.
Yes, and this will hopefully also give those watching an idea of how you could go about mapping out. We talked about the rugby analogy. You've got your props, you've got your hookers, you've got your centers, fly halves, right? So maybe you've got a combination of all of these, but how do we pick the best team? And first we need to understand who's playing, and that way we zoom out, and we've got a nice little tool that we built and that we personally use for clients every day, that we're going to show you how we use that, and how you could potentially also have a go at it to better understand what you have and to get insight. All we really want in life is to get clarity so that we can build confidence to take control of our money. And I'm quite excited for the next chat. So I hope to see you guys there soon.
Awesome.
Thank you. Bye-bye.